They said I owned nothing. At our anniversary dinner, my mother-in-law smiled as a video played on the big screen, footage of me shopping, dining, living lavishly. But my stomach twisted because I knew it wasn't me. The clip was flawless, an AI-crafted lie designed to erase my credibility. Around the table, whispers grew louder: gold digger, freeloader. My husband's hand went stiff in mine, doubt flickering in his eyes. I felt every gaze burn into me, a jury without mercy. Yet under my sleeve, a hidden USB pressed against my wrist, my silent weapon waiting for the right moment. When I first entered the Whitaker estate as a wife, it felt like stepping onto a stage set too grand for its actors. Chandeliers glowed like captive suns. The polished marble floor reflected every gesture, and the women carried themselves like aristocrats from another age. I smiled when they looked at me, careful, deferential. They saw me as an accessory, a woman who had married up, a woman who owned nothing. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself love was enough. But there were cracks in the polished glass. At our wedding reception, Lorna, my mother-in-law, insisted on surprising us with a family slideshow. She beamed as the projector lit up the room, her voice syrupy, as she declared it a tribute to the generations who built this empire. The first images were harmless, black and white photographs of ancestors in horse-drawn carriages, the old warehouse that grew into a financial empire. Then came the glossy pictures of estates, yachts, trusts, signed in gold-framed offices. My husband's name scrolled elegantly under each property title. My heart waited for mine to appear. It never did. The audience clapped as though history had been confirmed, and I kept my face steady. Inside, I felt the floor shift. The final slide shimmered with a family tree rendered in artificial perfection by AI. It named each child, each spouse, each heir. When my eyes reached the branch with my name, it was bare. No ownership, no annotation, nothing to tie me into the bloodline except a marriage certificate. I heard a laugh too loud at the table behind me, and though no words followed, I knew what they thought. She brings nothing. She owns nothing. She is nothing. My smile tightened until my jaw ached. Later that night, I stood in the powder room, the gilded mirror reflecting back a fractured version of myself. A line of crack in the corner made my reflection splinter, and for a fleeting second, I saw myself in pieces. Wife, stranger, intruder. Why was my name erased before I even arrived? The question looped in my head as I pressed cold water to my face. Paper didn't lie, but tonight a slideshow had rewritten me. I told myself it was an oversight, but oversights don't feel so deliberate. The following weeks, whispers thickened. At brunch, Lorna told a friend within my earshot, "Emily is lucky Daniel provides so well. She doesn't need to trouble herself with assets." The friend's eyes grazed me with pity, then dismissal. I swallowed the taste of iron and smiled as if I agreed, but my mind filed it away. Oversights build into stories, and stories, when repeated, become truth. The first blow landed 2 months later at another family dinner. Wine glasses chimed, laughter rolled, and then the screen lit up again. This time it wasn't a slideshow, it was a video. I blinked as the image sharpened. Me, stepping into a luxury boutique with bags in hand, swiping cards, champagne flutes glittering beside me, my laughter sharp and careless. My stomach clenched. I had never been there. I had never worn that dress. Around me, the whispers began again, harsher this time. She spends like a leech. Gold digger. Daniel deserves better. I gripped my napkin until my nails tore through the fabric. The video was seamless, frame by frame. The angle was perfect, the lighting convincing. I knew what it was, a deep fake. But no one else in the room would think twice. They saw proof. They saw a wife betraying her role. Daniel's hand stiffened in mine, and I felt the doubt pulse through his palm. He didn't say a word, but silence can be louder than an accusation. Lorna sat across the table, her smile gentle, her eyes sharp as razors. She looked at me the way a hunter looks at a snared animal, calm, triumphant, certain of victory. I wanted to scream, to leap up and tear down the illusion. Instead, I forced myself to sit still, to let their words coil around me. My chest burned, but beneath the fire was something colder. Calculation. Lies collapse under their own weight when you give them time. My turn would come. But as the night stretched, the video spread. Cousins pulled out their phones, recording the footage, laughing as they whispered to their spouses. Notifications pinged across the table. The clip was already online, already dissected, already damning. By dessert, it wasn't just a family performance. It was a live stream. 100 eyes had turned into thousands, strangers judging me with the same cruelty. The chandelier above flickered against the mirror behind me. The fractured reflection stared back, my own eyes blurred by cracks in the glass. I no longer saw myself whole. I saw a villain, sculpted by someone else's hand. My mother-in-law raised her glass, her voice silk and venom. To family and to truth. I clinked mine against Daniel's, though my throat refused to swallow. The glass trembled, the room applauded, and deep inside I knew the game had shifted. I wasn't the victim of silence anymore. I had been turned into the enemy. In the days after the deepfake scandal, I played the role they wrote for me. I smiled politely, accepted their sidelong glances, allowed myself to be the fool they believed I was. Silence became my armor. When my sister-in-law whispered at brunch, "She's probably maxed out Daniel's cards," I lowered my eyes as though ashamed. When Lorna patted my shoulder at dinner and murmured, "Some women simply aren't built for responsibility," I nodded as though I agreed. They thought the fire had burned me hollow. They didn't realize I was saving oxygen for the blaze to come. At night, behind the locked door of my study, I opened my laptop and summoned the forensic software I had once helped design. The screen came alive with frames dissected second by second, pixels layered against reality. Each smile in that fabricated video broke down into code. Each shopping bag, each champagne glass, each careless flick of my hair revealed its fracture line. Algorithms do not lie the way people do. They expose seams. I mapped them, frame by frame, until the truth unfolded like a confession. By dawn, I had built a file heavy with proof, metadata, error rates, watermarks buried under layers of forgery. The deepfake wasn't clever enough to escape a machine built to see what human eyes cannot. I pressed the evidence into a small silver USB drive and slid it into my pocket. When I carried it, I felt its weight like a secret heartbeat. To the world, I was defenseless. In my hands, I carried the weapon that could rewrite the story. I didn't strike immediately. Timing mattered more than fury. Let them grow comfortable in their false victory. Let them gossip until the venom dulled. I played the weak wife, the silent guest at their table, the woman too timid to look her accusers in the eye. In truth, I was listening, gathering. People confess the most when they believe you are powerless. I collected every careless remark, every slip of arrogance, every trace of corruption they revealed over clinking glasses. But my silence had another purpose. It gave Daniel room to choose. My husband watched me with eyes that flickered between doubt and guilt. I knew he had questions, but he didn't ask. Instead, he buried himself in work, retreating behind the safety of spreadsheets and contracts. I waited. If he couldn't find me in the storm, then I would fight alone. The breakthrough came one evening in his office. Papers were stacked high, but I saw what mattered, a document transferring trustee authority for the family's largest holding company. He hesitated as I entered, his fingers brushing the edge of the signature line. For a long moment, silence stretched between us. Then he said softly, "I know you didn't do it. The video... Something about it was wrong. I should have defended you sooner." His pen met paper, his name sealing what felt like both apology and allegiance. That signature was more than trust. It was a key. With trustee rights, I gained access to the digital vault where the family funneled its wealth. What they never realized, what even Daniel hadn't known, was that years ago, when their empire faced a silent crisis, I had been the one to keep it alive. Through a shell company built with my maiden name, I had injected capital into their accounts, a quiet bridge loan hidden beneath layers of corporate smoke. Without it, their prized lake house would have been sold, their empire fractured. I hadn't wanted credit then. I had wanted peace, but peace is never free. Now, the records revealed the truth. I wasn't a guest at their table. I was part of the foundation that held it upright. With trustee access, I shifted my focus to the blockchain ledger I had constructed in secrecy. Each property, each dividend, each offshore account. They had all passed through nodes I once configured. The Whitaker fortune had unknowingly run along rails I built. It was like discovering a city where every street sign bore my invisible hand. By transferring their assets into the system, they had already placed their future in my keeping. That night, I opened the interface, lines of code flickering against the dark. With a few commands, I illuminated the network. The screen filled with transactions, each tagged with digital fingerprints. I traced them backward until I found the moment my hidden company had injected funds. Proof. Ownership written not on fragile paper, but in immutable blocks of data. The irony was exquisite. They had mocked me as a woman who owned nothing, while all along the infrastructure of their fortune flowed through my design. The empire they believed untouchable now rested on my terms. I closed the laptop and exhaled, the USB still warm in my pocket. My secret weapon was ready. Soon, when the time was right, I would decide whether to detonate it quietly or let it explode in full view. Either way, the story would no longer belong to Lorna. But before that moment came, I knew something deeper had shifted. Daniel's signature had marked a turning point. For the first time, I wasn't fighting entirely alone. The thought steadied me, even as shadows lengthened. They still believed I was weak. Let them. Weakness was the perfect disguise, and when the mask finally fell, they would see what it had been hiding. Not a victim, not an intruder, but the architect of the empire they claimed as theirs. The morning the story broke, I felt the air shift before I saw the headlines. My phone buzzed with a torrent of notifications, articles, comments, a smear spreading like oil across water. Whitaker, daughter-in-law unfit to manage assets due to psychiatric condition. My hands shook as I scrolled. There, stamped with fake authority, was a medical report claiming I suffered from delusional tendencies and compulsive spending. The document was signed by a doctor I had never met. Lorna's fingerprints were all over it. The timing was perfect. Just when I had begun to steady myself, she launched another strike. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about erasing me as a credible human being. If the diagnosis stuck, I could lose not only control of assets, but also guardianship of any future children. It was a narrative designed to cripple me permanently. I dug deeper, following digital trails. Metadata told the truth paper tried to hide. The so-called doctor's license had expired 5 years ago. His online presence was limited to encrypted forums where records for hire were sold like weapons. A shadow market of fabricated health files, bank statements, even death certificates, all available to those with money and malice. Lorna had tapped into that world to paint me insane. I stared at the timeline I had built on the wall of my study. Each event, each document, each whispered insult pinned like evidence. Now, with the forged report in hand, the pattern sharpened. This wasn't a string of accidents. It was a campaign. Every slight, every omission, every falsified video formed part of a long con to reduce me into silence. For a moment, despair clawed at me. To fight gossip is exhausting, but to fight forged reality is almost impossible. People prefer the scandalous version of the story. Truth is too quiet, too patient. My reflection in the window looked pale, fractured. If I let this stand, my future would collapse into a cage I hadn't built. But fear is a blunt instrument. Precision is sharper. I opened my laptop, loaded the forensic toolkit, and pulled the fraudulent record into analysis. The seals flickered under scrutiny, pixels unraveling into inconsistencies, fonts mismatched, timestamps overlapped impossibly. Within minutes, I had built a dossier showing exactly how the forgery was constructed. Still, data alone wasn't enough. The family had already seen the fake. They needed to see the truth unfold before their eyes. That night, I set up cameras and lighting in my office. The world would not be handed a press release. They would witness the process. When I pressed Go Live, my face appeared on a dozen screens. The comments rolled fast, some hostile, some curious. I began quietly. They've told you I am sick, that I'm delusional. Tonight, you'll see for yourself what's delusion and what's design. I shared my screen, dragging the forged report into view. Step by step, I broke it down. I showed the dark web marketplace where such records were sold, complete with usernames tied to the transaction. I traced the payment chain, ending in an account suspiciously linked to one of Lorna's shell companies. Gasps appeared in the chat. Comments shifted, from ridicule to doubt, from doubt to outrage. But the true rupture came minutes later. As I scrolled through the payment logs, another name appeared, one that stunned me. Uncle Robert, Daniel's quiet uncle, who had always sat at family dinners with folded hands, was listed as a co-signer. The chat exploded. Her own uncle-in-law? This runs deeper. My chest tightened. Betrayal from Lorna was expected. But Robert, he had been the neutral one, the silent observer. Now the mask cracked. He had taken part, benefiting from the slander that eroded me. The room around me felt smaller, the camera hotter. My family-in-law was not a fractured alliance. It was a syndicate, tied together by greed. By the time I ended the stream, the forged diagnosis was ashes. Viewers had watched it burn in real time, dissected until it could never be rebuilt. In the court of public opinion, I had scored a victory. Headlines shifted. Deepfake victim proves medical smear a fraud. Sympathy trickled where scorn once flowed. Yet when I closed the laptop, silence pressed heavy. I had won. But the cost was carved into the fractures of the family itself. Daniel sat across from me, his face pale. "You've proven yourself," he said, "but what's left of us after this?" His question lingered. I had destroyed the weapon aimed at me, but in the process, I had torn open the rot inside the Whitaker name. Lorna's empire was crumbling under exposure. Robert's betrayal had detonated bonds that might never mend. Victory is not always sweet. Sometimes it tastes like ash. As I lay in bed that night, the glow of the monitor still burning in my mind, I realized something chilling. I hadn't dismantled their long con. I had only forced them to reveal how long it had been running. And in that revelation, the war had only begun. The morning after my live stream, the Whitaker estate was no longer quiet. News vans lined the street, neighbors whispered on sidewalks, and the family gathered with the kind of tension reserved for funerals. Lorna summoned everyone to the grand hall, insisting this was a moment for clarity. The chandeliers gleamed overhead, but the room felt brittle, ready to shatter under a single word. I carried my laptop and the small silver USB that had become my compass. When I stood before them, their eyes pierced me, half fury, half fear. I didn't tremble. "You've called me a fraud, a liar, even unwell," I began. "But I won't fight those battles one by one. I'll show you something bigger." The projector came alive, casting blue light across the room. On the screen, a web of transactions unfolded, digital threads connecting every estate, every offshore account, every dividend. "This is the Phoenix Protocol," I said, a system built on blockchain smart contracts. Every asset, every transfer, immutable and transparent. No more forged papers, no more hidden loans. From this day forward, the Whitaker fortune lives here, or it vanishes. Gasps circled the hall. A cousin muttered, "That's impossible." Another whispered, "She's bluffing." But Daniel stood at my side, his hand firm on my shoulder. "It's real," he said. "I've seen it. Without her, none of this stands." I clicked once more. Numbers filled the screen, balances pulled directly from the accounts they thought hidden. A property in Florida listed under Robert's name, a fund in the Caymans tied to Lorna's signature, even the yacht she boasted about as her own, all displayed with timestamps and ownership trails. They shifted uneasily, the old language of secrets stripped bare by code that could not lie. "This isn't theft," I said quietly. "It's salvation. If you refuse, the contracts nullify. Assets tied to fraudulent signatures collapse. The empire dissolves. But if you agree, if you sign, we step into a future no one can rewrite." For a moment, silence gripped the hall. Then voices rose in panic. Robert barked that it was extortion. A cousin shouted that I was power-hungry. But beneath the noise, they all knew the truth. Paper can burn. Signatures can be forged, but code was beyond their reach. I placed the contract on the table. "Sign or watch everything fall." My eyes locked on Lorna. Her face was pale, but her smile stayed fixed, brittle as glass. The empire she had ruled with whispers and lies now balanced on a pen. If she refused, her legacy crumbled. If she agreed, her power dissolved into mine. Her hand hovered above the page. For the first time, I saw hesitation in her eyes. That was the cliff's edge, the choice that would decide not only the fortune, but the hierarchy of our bloodline. Before her pen touched paper, she played her last card. "If truth is what you demand," she said smoothly, "then let's show them all of it." She raised her phone, fingers tapping quickly. Moments later, the screen flickered again. A video appeared. I froze. It was me, laughing with a man who wasn't my husband, stepping into a hotel suite, his hand on my back. The crowd erupted, gasps, curses, the sting of betrayal filling the air like smoke. Lorna's eyes glittered. "This is your savior?" she whispered. "This is the woman who preaches transparency?" My knees nearly buckled. For a heartbeat, even Daniel's face twisted with disbelief. The video was perfect. Better than the shopping spree, more intimate, more damning. If this stood, I was ruined not just as a trustee, but as a wife. But fear sharpened my focus. I opened the AI authenticity scanner, projecting the feed in real time. "Watch closely," I said, my voice steady despite the storm. The software dissected the video frame by frame. Pixels stuttered under scrutiny. The shadow on the wall bent the wrong way. Reflections in glass didn't match movement. Line by line, the lie unraveled before their eyes. "This," I said, freezing the screen on the glitching silhouette, "is a fabrication, a digital weapon forged to destroy me, and like every weapon you've used, it fails under truth." The hall fell silent. 50 pairs of eyes shifted from the broken video to Lorna. Her smile faltered, cracking into something desperate. For years, she had ruled with image, illusion, control. In a single moment, it all collapsed. Daniel rose. His voice carried through the hall, steady as stone. "Enough. We trusted you, we defended you, but you've destroyed this family more than any outsider could. From today forward, Emily is the trustee. She holds the empire. Sign or lose everything." The pen dropped from Lorna's trembling fingers. Her empire was ashes, her authority stripped clean. The woman who had painted me villain now sat, diminished, her silence louder than any accusation. I looked at the fractured mirror on the far wall. For the first time, the reflection staring back wasn't broken. It was whole, sharpened by fire, reborn. The Phoenix Protocol wasn't just a system, it was my resurrection. Victory arrived not with cheers, but with silence. The Whitaker estate became a place of closed doors and hushed voices. Though the Phoenix Protocol had secured every asset under my stewardship, it also marked me as a tyrant in their eyes. They obeyed because they had no choice, not because they believed. My sister-in-law no longer texted me recipes or baby pictures. At gatherings, she kept her distance, her eyes icy, her words clipped. My brother-in-law muttered dictator under his breath when he thought I couldn't hear. Even Daniel grew quieter, his support steady but weighted with unease. The worst moment came in the nursery. My niece, barely 5, tugged at my sleeve with tear-filled eyes. "Aunt Emily," she whispered, "why did you break our family? Mommy says you took everything away." Her words pierced deeper than any accusation. I knelt, trying to answer, but nothing I could say would erase what she had already been taught. The truth had freed me, but it had shackled the children in confusion. The sound of her sobs echoed in my chest long after she left the room. Night stretched heavy. I sat by the window, staring at the estate below, wondering if my reflection had blurred into Lorna's. Control, transparency, order. These were the justifications Lorna had whispered to herself, too. Am I becoming her? The question gnawed at me until even victory tasted bitter. Then, one morning, the storm broke again. Headlines screamed, "Whistleblower leaks, reveal Whitaker lawyer embezzlement scheme." Screens across the country filled with emails, contracts, and payment records. The family lawyer, a man who had attended every dinner, toasted every marriage, and guided every will, was exposed as the puppeteer. For years, he had siphoned funds through back channels, forging documents and manipulating signatures. The deepfakes, the medical records, even the slideshow that erased my name, all traced back to transactions he engineered. Lorna had been his weapon, not his mastermind. She had wielded malice, but he had orchestrated the symphony. The revelation shook the family to its core. Reporters camped outside the gates, hungry for every detail. Investors demanded answers. The once unshakable Whitaker name trembled under the weight of betrayal from within. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, a darker truth settled over me. While I had fought Lorna, the true enemy had remained invisible, pulling strings in the shadows. My triumph had been partial at best, manipulated to distract me from the larger theft. I called a meeting, gathering everyone in the same hall where Lorna had once tried to destroy me. The projector once again lit the room, but this time, the evidence wasn't mine alone. The whistleblower files scrolled across the screen, exposing decades of quiet theft. Gasps echoed as familiar signatures appeared beside fraudulent transfers. The lawyer had played them all. Me, Daniel, even Lorna. He divided us so he could take what he wanted, I said, my voice carrying over the stunned silence. While we tore at each other, he built his fortune on our ruin. Faces turned pale, lips pressed tight. No one spoke. For once, even Lorna had no words. Her empire, her reputation, her family, all had been tools in another man's scheme. Yet just as relief brushed my shoulders, betrayal struck again. My sister-in-law, the one who had once slipped me sympathetic glances, rose to her feet. "Enough!" she snapped. "You think you're saving us, Emily, but you've only made things worse. You dragged us into public shame. You handed strangers the power to judge us. And now you want us to trust you with what's left." Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with something colder. Calculation. In her hand, she held a folder thick with documents. She tossed it onto the table. Inside were contracts, half-finished transfers, and drafts of agreements. She had been working with the lawyer, feeding him access in exchange for promises of power once I was discredited. My chest tightened. Of all the betrayals, hers cut the deepest. She had been my quiet ally, the only one who had shown me kindness when the family turned. Now she revealed herself as the final dagger. The room erupted in shouts. Some condemned her, others defended her. But the truth was clear. I had exposed the puppeteer, yet the stage was still rotten with conspirators. My niece's face flashed in my mind, her tears blurring with the image of her mother standing against me. As the voices swelled, I realized this was no longer about money or titles. It was about survival. Mine and whatever fragment of family could still be salvaged. The empire I now held in my hands was not a crown. It was a pyre. The estate had become a battlefield of whispers and broken alliances. Contracts were shredded, loyalties tested, and the air itself seemed heavy with betrayal. I had clawed my way to the top, but the throne I occupied was sharp and cold. Power without trust is isolation, and I felt it in every empty corridor. For days, I sat before the wall of documents, signatures, and blockchain ledgers. They told a story that no one could dispute, but they also told me something else. The Whitaker Empire had been built on secrecy. Each hidden transfer, each forged paper, each false promise had carried us further into rot. If I simply maintained the system, the cycle would continue. If I truly wanted freedom, I would have to destroy the very rules that gave me power. So I made my choice. I drafted a statement and scheduled a press conference. When the cameras lit up, I stood not as the malign daughter-in-law nor the iron-fisted trustee, but as the architect of a new order. "This family has lived in shadows too long," I said, my voice steady. "Today we step into the light. Every asset, every trust, every investment tied to the Whitaker name is now public record. No hidden deeds, no silent transfers. We belong not to whispers, but to truth." Gasps followed. Reporters scribbled furiously. The live stream counter ticked higher by the second. With one command, I published the full ledger. Every estate, every offshore account, every dollar tied to our name. The empire that had once been guarded by secrecy now belonged to transparency itself. And then I did something that startled even me. I renounced a portion of my own stake. 10% of my shares, enough to secure me permanently, I gave away, split into a fund designed to stabilize the family and protect the younger generation. The gesture cost me dearly, but it felt necessary. Power only corrupts when you hoard it. To keep peace, I had to prove that even I was not above sacrifice. That night, silence gripped the estate again, but it was different this time, less sharp, more contemplative. At dawn, I heard a knock on my study door. When I opened it, Lorna stood there. Her face, once polished into steel, looked worn and bare. She carried no smile, no venom, only a fragile question. "Can we begin again?" she asked. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were clear. I studied her, seeing the woman who had tried to erase me, the woman who had nearly destroyed her own bloodline for control. Yet I also saw the cracks in her armor, the surrender in her stance. She wasn't a queen anymore. She was just a mother, frightened of losing everything. I didn't answer right away. Forgiveness is not a word you offer cheaply, but I stepped aside, allowing her into the room. Sometimes mercy is the sharpest weapon of all. Weeks later, the house felt different. The mirrors, once fractured, reflected us as we were, not perfect, but honest. The family gathered not under threats, but under rules written in code, rules no one could bend. Transparency became our shield. It wasn't harmony, not yet, but it was survival. Daniel began to smile again, a weary but genuine smile. My sister-in-law still kept her distance, but her child ran to me without fear. Even Robert, disgraced and humiliated, sat quietly at the edge of gatherings, no longer plotting, no longer pulling strings. The greatest transformation, however, wasn't in them. It was in me. I had entered this family branded as a parasite, a woman with nothing. Now I stood as proof that truth, when armed with patience and precision, can rewrite even the oldest narratives. I had become more than a trustee. I had become a mirror, unforgiving, unyielding, but clear. With Daniel at my side, I established something beyond the family's reach, a blockchain-based charity designed to channel a portion of our fortune into scholarships, housing programs, and healthcare. It was the Whitaker legacy stripped of arrogance, rebuilt into something that mattered. Reporters called it visionary, I called it survival. On the day of its launch, I stood before the crowd, the cameras, the millions watching from their screens. I thought of the fractured girl I had seen in the mirror months ago, broken by a slideshow, erased by a deepfake. She no longer existed. In her place was a woman reborn in fire, no longer asking to be seen but ensuring she could never be erased again. I ended my speech with a question, one that had haunted me since the beginning. If you had to choose truth or family, what would you keep? The silence that followed was heavy, unanswerable. For some, family would always outweigh truth. For others, truth would cost too much. For me, the answer was both a wound and a crown. I had chosen truth, and in doing so, I had forced my family to rise or crumble beside it. As I left the stage, the mirror at the back of the hall caught my reflection. This time it was whole, unfractured, not perfect, not unscarred, but honest. And for the first time, I didn't look away.